We are counting down the 10 most disturbing revenge deaths ever recorded. Cases where carefully crafted plots for payback ended in the ultimate twist: the avenger becoming the victim. From fatal mechanical sabotage and poisoned gifts to high-tech frame-ups and explosive traps, each case exposes how obsession with revenge turns masterminds into casualties of their own designs. Which catastrophic scheme ranks as the most chilling example of vengeance gone fatally wrong? Let's begin with number 10. In September 2016, Mark Ellison, a certified auto mechanic from Boise, Idaho, spent months quietly plotting revenge after a bitter divorce left him resentful and isolated. He believed his ex-wife had ruined his reputation and finances, fueling a slow-burning obsession. By early spring, Ellison's fixation narrowed to a single plan: sabotage the brakes on his ex-wife's sedan. Using his professional tools, he carefully scored the brake lines beneath the chassis, leaving just enough integrity so the failure would appear accidental on a winding mountain road. He prepared with the precision of a mechanic, confident the altered lines would fail only when she drove the descent. But as the weekend arrived, Ellison borrowed the same car to run errands, certain in his own handiwork. On a sharp descent outside town, the brakes gave way. The vehicle plunged over 200 feet into a ravine. Emergency responders documented massive thoracic trauma and fatal hemorrhagic shock. Forensic analysis later matched tool marks on the severed brake line to wrenches found in Ellison's garage. Investigators concluded the crash was the direct result of his own mechanical sabotage. His ex-wife, upon learning the truth, filed charges against his estate, ensuring the consequences of his scheme endured long after his death. In October 2018, Ellen Hartley, a former lab technician from Sacramento, purchased a potent household toxin online, intent on exacting revenge against a former friend who had humiliated her at work. Her plan was simple. She wrapped a bottle of the rival's favorite imported wine, handled the bottle with gloves, resealed the cork, and wrapped it in decorative paper. She had secretly laced the wine with an odorless poison, confident the gesture would pass as a peace offering. At a holiday party 2 weeks later, the intended target, unaware of the plot, re-gifted the bottle back to Hartley in front of mutual friends. Social pressure and the setting left Hartley with no easy way out, and she drank the wine. Within hours, she collapsed, suffering acute hepatic failure. Hospital toxicology traced a specific metabolite to the exact compound she had purchased online. Fingerprints on the packaging and receipts for the toxin completed the chain of evidence. During the coroner's inquest, the original target testified about their workplace feud, establishing motive. In June 2020, police in Fort Worth, Texas, launched a covert operation after a tip that Cassandra Lowe was seeking to have her ex-husband's new girlfriend killed. Detectives posing as contract killers arranged a meeting at a remote construction lot on the city's outskirts. Hidden microphones captured Lowe describing the target, providing photographs, and placing a cash deposit on a dashboard, all while she believed she was orchestrating a perfect crime. The undercover officer then revealed his identity and squad cars converged. Lowe panicked. She sprinted to her vehicle and fled, reaching speeds recorded at over 110 miles per hour, weaving between traffic on a 2-lane road. Less than 4 miles from the sting site, she lost control on a curve. The car rolled 3 times, ejecting her through the windshield. Paramedics recorded a traumatic brain injury and multiple fractures. She was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. Audio evidence from the sting was played at the inquest, confirming the murder-for-hire plot. The intended victim, protected by police, suffered no physical harm. The case reignited debate over undercover stings and the legal boundaries of entrapment. But forensic crash reconstruction left no doubt. The fatal outcome was triggered by Lowe's own desperate attempt to escape justice. On August 19, 2017, business partners Eric Wallace and Daniel Price prepared for a technical ascent in the Bitterroot Mountains of western Montana. Their outdoor gear company had become a battleground after a bitter legal dispute over patent rights, leaving Wallace convinced that Price had stolen his designs and ruined his future. Over the next year, Wallace's resentment hardened into a single-minded obsession. He studied climbing hardware failure reports, purchased duplicate camming devices, and documented stress tests in a private workshop. His plan relied on precision. Sabotage Price's cam by slicing the internal stitching and reassembling it to appear untouched. The expectation was clear. The device would hold under static body weight, but fail catastrophically under dynamic load, sending Price into a deadly fall. Confident in his modifications, Wallace insisted on a final test climb before their scheduled group expedition. He selected the same route, using the tampered cam as his primary anchor. Halfway up a granite face, the device sheared under load. Wallace plummeted 400 feet, suffering multiple compound fractures and fatal blunt force trauma. Forensic metallurgists later analyzed the failed cam and found cut nylon fibers and tool marks that matched scissors and pliers recovered from Wallace's garage. Purchase receipts for identical replacement gear, together with a series of deleted emails that outlined his plan, completed the evidentiary picture. Investigators concluded that Wallace's own engineered sabotage produced the outcome he had intended for his rival, only to himself. It is a stark example of how revenge, pursued with ruthless calculation, can become self-destruction. Click the next video for another disturbing example. In July 2019, Sean Delaney, a 34-year-old outdoor instructor from Bend, Oregon, became consumed by jealousy after his partner left him for another climber in their tight-knit community. Friends described him as steady and methodical, but the breakup left him withdrawn and irritable. Over the next several months, his thoughts circled around the new couple's weekend routines, especially their favorite climbing routes at Smith Rock State Park. He began researching anchor bolt mechanics and reading up on torque failure in climbing hardware. By late August, Delaney had settled on a calculated plan: sabotage the anchor bolts on a popular 511 route his rival often climbed. Using a calibrated torque wrench, he loosened several stainless steel expansion bolts, reducing their torque to just 30 Newton-meters, barely enough to hold static weight, but certain to fail under a dynamic fall. Days later, Delaney returned to the crag, intending to reclaim his reputation by climbing the same route in front of mutual friends. He did not remember which bolts he had sabotaged. Halfway up the wall, his rope ran through a compromised anchor. On a routine move, a bolt sheared from the rock. Delaney fell over 220 feet, suffering catastrophic pelvic fractures and internal bleeding. The medical examiner listed cause of death as hemorrhagic shock. Forensic engineers tested the remaining anchors and confirmed substandard torque on multiple bolts. Climbing logs and site usage records placed Delaney at the scene both during the sabotage and the fatal climb. Investigators concluded he died by the very trap he had set, a memory lapse turning a calculated vendetta into a fatal, self-inflicted error. In February 2021, Thomas Reddick, a recently terminated building maintenance supervisor in Cleveland, set out to punish his former employer for what he regarded as an unjust firing. Reddick had spent more than a decade in the same high-rise office complex, building a reputation for technical skill and quiet reliability. After a heated dispute with his manager over budget cuts, he was dismissed and escorted from the premises. The loss left him angry, restless, and convinced his expertise had been exploited and discarded. Over the next 6 weeks, Reddick poured that expertise into an elaborate plan. Using an old access card that had never been deactivated in the company's system, he slipped into the building after hours. His target was the manager's office, a space he knew inside and out. Reddick began rewiring electrical outlets, installing a hidden relay loop tied to the main 240-volt supply. He disguised the modifications behind baseboards and routed a live wire through a surge protector, intending to electrify the metal desk when switched on. Circuit diagrams recovered later showed careful calculations for current flow, but a crucial oversight: the relay's failsafe was miswired, allowing current to backfeed even when the trap was supposed to be disabled. On March 15th, Reddick returned to document his handiwork, planning to use video evidence as leverage in a wrongful termination lawsuit. He entered the office, inserted a USB drive into the computer, and reached for the desk lamp. That motion triggered the live circuit. An electrical arc leapt from the metal frame to his hand, sending the full 240 volts through his body. Within 6 seconds, the current induced ventricular fibrillation, causing immediate cardiac arrest. Security footage later showed Reddick entering alone and collapsing instantly. Medical examiners documented contact burns on his palm and wrist, classic for high-voltage electrocution. Building management overhauled access controls and mandated a full security audit, citing the incident as a wake-up call about the dangers of insider sabotage. On a chilly night in March 14, 2022, Leonard Briggs parked his truck a block away from his brother-in-law's split-level home in suburban Milwaukee. Years of bitter arguments over their late father's estate had left Leonard convinced his brother-in-law had manipulated the will, cutting him out of a 6-figure inheritance. Friends described Leonard as methodical, even gentle before the dispute. But by winter, his resentment had hardened into obsession. He spent weeks studying gas leak incidents and insurance fraud cases, learning how a staged accident could be made to look like suicide. Over several nights, he purchased flexible gas line couplers, nitrile gloves, and a basic timer switch at hardware stores across the county, never using the same location twice. Late on March 14, 2022, he crept into the basement, tools in hand. He loosened the main gas line behind the water heater, careful to keep the opening below the lower explosive limit, then scattered documents and prescription bottles to mimic a desperate act. He planned to return before dawn to plant a forged note and tip off authorities. The gas, heavier than air, pooled along the floor and crept past the safe threshold. At 4:18 in the morning, a refrigerator relay clicked on, sparking a fireball. The blast ripped through the foundation, registering over 4 pounds per square inch of overpressure. Leonard was found near the epicenter, suffering burns to 85% of his body and fatal inhalation injuries. The scene became an instant inferno. Fire investigators traced accelerant residue and mismatched coupler threads back to receipts and planning notes in Leonard's home office. The insurance company denied coverage, citing criminal intent, and local authorities launched a review of gas line inspection protocols. The intended target survived, but the neighborhood faced weeks of disruption and costly repairs. Leonard's pursuit of retribution had turned a private family feud into a public safety disaster. On November 2, 2021, hospital records in Des Moines flagged an unusual override on the Pyxis medication dispensing system. The audit trail pointed to Mary Halverson, a veteran night shift nurse with 15 years of spotless service. Halverson's life had begun to unravel after a malpractice suit brought by a former patient, a lawsuit that left her reputation in ruins and her nursing license under review. Friends remembered her as diligent and compassionate, but after the verdict, she grew withdrawn, consumed by a need to retaliate against the patient whose testimony had cost her everything. Halverson spent weeks researching neuromuscular blockers, focusing on vecuronium, a drug that requires dual authentication and is rarely accessed outside critical care. On the night of October 30th, she bypassed protocol using an override, withdrawing a 10-milligram vial and falsifying the log. She entered her former patient's room under the guise of routine care, intending to administer a fatal dose. but a struggle broke out. In the chaos, the intravenous line reversed, and Halverson accidentally injected herself with the same drug. Within 90 seconds, both she and the patient suffered acute respiratory arrest. Code Blue was called, but neither survived. Toxicology confirmed vecuronium at lethal concentrations in both victims. Investigators traced the Pyxis override and matched Halverson's handwritten notes detailing revenge. The hospital board convened an emergency review, instituting new dual authentication requirements and expanding controlled substance log audits. The state nursing board revoked Halverson's license posthumously. The double fatality, planned by a medical insider using her own expertise, exposed vulnerabilities in medication security and forced systemic change. The irony was inescapable. The very skills meant to heal became the instrument of her undoing. In April 2023, digital forensics consultant Adrian Meyer began assembling the ultimate act of modern revenge. After a bitter fallout with a former colleague, Meyer set out to destroy his rival's career using the tools he knew best: synthetic media and digital manipulation. For weeks, he worked alone in his apartment, meticulously scripting and editing a deepfake video that depicted his target committing financial fraud. The project demanded relentless focus. Meyer ran a 47-hour continuous render on his custom-built workstation, fine-tuning facial overlays and matching voice samples. He embedded metadata to mimic the rival's device signatures, ensuring the file would pass a casual authenticity check. The pressure of the scheme mounted as deadlines slipped. Meyer's heart pounded through sleepless nights, fueled by caffeine and a growing sense of paranoia. Device logs later showed dozens of remote logins and repeated file transfers as he tested the video's believability. On the final night, he attempted a last-minute revision, frantically patching audio artifacts while his hands shook uncontrollably. At 2:11 in the morning, he collapsed at his desk, suffering ventricular fibrillation. Paramedics recorded asystole on arrival. The autopsy revealed a 95% occlusion in his left anterior descending artery, consistent with a fatal myocardial infarction triggered by an acute catecholamine surge. Blood tests confirmed an elevated troponin level, a marker of cardiac muscle damage. Investigators pieced together the plot from encrypted drives and backup logs. The deepfake file, still open on Meyer's desktop, was traced to his own IP address. Chain of custody analysis confirmed the video never left his possession. Forensic experts presented their findings at the inquest, detailing the technical sophistication of the digital forgery and the physiological toll exacted by the stress. The intended target was exonerated, learning only after Meyer's death how close his reputation came to ruin. The case stands as a warning. Even in cyberspace, obsession with revenge can be as lethal as any physical weapon. It sometimes kills the planner before the plot ever reaches its mark. Click the next video to see more disturbing stories that reveal the true cost of vengeance. At 2:36 a.m. on July 11, 2022, a 3-alarm fire ripped through the ground floor of a specialty plastics business in Newark, New Jersey. The blaze began in the rear storage area and quickly consumed insulation, climbing up the walls. By the time firefighters arrived, flames had breached the roof and thick black smoke blanketed the street. Inside, investigators later found the body of Paul Haskins, a 52-year-old former co-owner, pinned near a locked side exit. For months, Haskins had nursed deep resentment after being forced out of the company by a rival partner. Friends described him as once even-tempered, but recent legal losses and mounting debts left him withdrawn and bitter. In the weeks before the fire, security logs showed him circling the property at odd hours. Cell tower records placed him nearby on multiple late nights. Haskins had spent weeks researching arson techniques, focusing on accelerant spread and ignition timing. Purchase records showed he bought 18 liters of gasoline, several glass bottles, and a box of Strike Anywhere matches from hardware stores across Essex County. Surveillance footage captured him walking to the rear alley with 2 duffel bags shortly before the fire began. Forensic chemists later identified a distinct accelerant pattern on the concrete. High concentrations of gasoline, confirmed through gas chromatography, marked a deliberate pour path leading from the back door to the main loading bay. Investigators also found scorched glass fragments consistent with improvised incendiary devices near the point of origin. But Haskins' plan unraveled almost immediately. The building, constructed in the 1970s, contained multiple unreported code violations. A recent renovation had blocked a secondary exit with stacked pallets and plywood, while old foam insulation in the walls acted as a hidden accelerant. Within 3 minutes of ignition, internal temperatures soared above 600 degrees Celsius. The fire reached flashover when every exposed surface ignites, trapping Haskins inside. Autopsy records documented a carboxyhemoglobin level of 54% and carbon monoxide concentrations exceeding 12,000 parts per million, both consistent with rapid incapacitation. Full-thickness burns covered 80% of his body, and char depth reached 6 millimeters, indicating exposure to extreme heat for several minutes. Code enforcement officers reviewing inspection records discovered the blocked exit and outdated fire suppression system had gone unreported for years. The city ordered a full audit of commercial fire safety compliance, citing the case as a catalyst for sweeping reforms. Insurance investigators denied the business's claim, citing criminal arson and gross negligence. The intended rival, who had left the company months earlier, was unharmed. Haskins' death, triggered by his own elaborate scheme, forced a reckoning not just for the business, but for local regulatory agencies. The fire that was meant to destroy a competitor instead consumed its architect, exposing how obsession with retribution can blind even the most methodical planner to fatal hidden dangers. Across all 10 cases, one pattern is unmistakable. Obsession with revenge clouds judgment, turning victims into architects of their own undoing. These deaths prove the real danger isn't the enemy, it's the inability to let go. Even the most meticulous plot unravels when consumed by vengeance. In the end, revenge doesn't just punish, it destroys its pursuer. The true cost is never paid by the target, but by the avenger themselves.